winter of 1891 had teeth, not the ordinary bite of frost that stung the cheeks or stiffened the fingers. This was a winter that gnawed straight into the marrow of a man. In the Bitterroot Mountains, it came early and without mercy. By November, the rivers were already locked in ice. By December, the trails were gone under drifts taller than a horse's withers. Folks out here said the snow didn't fall that year. It descended like a curtain closing on the world. Elijah Carver, a mountain man by necessity more than by trade, had weathered winters before, but even he muttered to himself as he hauled in the last of the firewood. His beard carried frost before the sun cleared the ridge. His cabin, rough-hewn and low to the ground, shook in the gales that barreled down from the peaks. That morning, Elijah had gone farther than he liked, checking the deadfalls he'd set along a narrow cut of timber. The snares had caught nothing, only empty loops rimed with ice. Even the foxes were thin this year, their prints fading quick under fresh snow. He turned back toward the cabin, rifle slung over his shoulder, when he caught sight of something strange at the tree line. At first he thought it was just a drift shaped by the wind, a hollow pressed in the snow, a shadow in the white. But then it moved. Elijah froze. A figure was there, slumped against the roots of a fallen pine, so small against the storm that he might have missed her if not for the faint tremor in her shoulders. A woman. She was wrapped in nothing but rags, skirts torn to strips, her shawl more ice than wool. Her cheeks were sunken, her lips cracked and bloodless. When she lifted her head, he saw the dull gleam of eyes that hadn't seen food nor kindness in too long. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out, dry, hollow. Elijah's stomach knotted. He'd seen hunger before, in himself, in others, but this was worse. This was the kind of hunger that stripped the body and the spirit both. Whoever she was, she'd been left to die in the snow, and she was near the end of it. He crouched down slow, careful not to startle her. "You'll freeze here," he said, voice steady, but not unkind. "Let me get you to shelter." Her head shook once, weakly. She tried to pull away, as though even the offer of help burned, but her hands, raw, cracked, trembling, betrayed her need. Elijah slipped off his coat and draped it over her thin shoulders. The weight of it nearly toppled her sideways. He cursed under his breath, then scooped her up. She was light, far too light, as though her bones were all that held her together. The trek back to his cabin was punishing. The snow seemed deeper with each step, the wind sharper. The woman stirred once, a faint groan, then went limp against his chest. Elijah quickened his pace, every breath a knife in his lungs. When he finally reached the cabin, he shouldered the door open and carried her inside. The fire had nearly died. He dropped to his knees, laid her on his cot, and went to work fast, stacking kindling, coaxing flame until warmth returned to the single-room shelter. Only then did he look at her again. She lay motionless, lips parted, skin pale as the snow outside. Elijah poured water from the kettle, touched the rim of the cup to her mouth. "Drink," he muttered. "Come on now, drink." Her throat worked, barely. A swallow, then another. He sat back, dragging a hand through his beard, eyes never leaving her. Out here, folks didn't just turn up by chance, not in this kind of cold. Someone had driven her into the wilderness. Someone had let her starve. And Elijah Carver, who had long believed himself finished with the world's cruelties, felt the stir of an old, stubborn anger. This woman had been left to die. He wasn't about to let her. For 3 days, Elijah hardly left her side. The woman drifted between shallow sleep and uneasy waking, her body too frail to reclaim strength all at once. He kept the fire stacked high, never letting it gutter. He cooked broth from the bones of last autumn's deer, ladled it in slow, careful sips to her lips. She resisted at first, lips pressed tight, as though she didn't believe she deserved even that small mercy. But Elijah was stubborn. He held the spoon steady until she relented. When she swallowed, he caught a flicker in her eyes. Not gratitude yet, not trust, but something closer to disbelief. As though the act of being fed was a kind of miracle. On the second night, when a storm rattled the shutters, Elijah sat sharpening his knife at the table while she stirred on the cot. She tried to push herself upright but failed, falling back with a groan. "You'll tear yourself apart," he muttered without looking up. "Rest is the only thing you got right now." Her voice, when it came, was cracked and hoarse like branches breaking under frost. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Elijah set the knife down. The sound of it against the wood seemed too sharp, too final. "Would you rather I left you where I found you?" he asked. Her lips trembled. She shook her head once. "Then you've got your answer," he said. She turned her face toward the fire. He didn't press her further. By the fourth morning, she managed to sit up on her own. The shawl he'd laid across her shoulders still clung to her, though he'd stitched the holes with strips of leather. She studied the steam rising from the bowl he set before her, but her hands shook too much to hold the spoon. Elijah crouched down, dipped the spoon, and held it out. She hesitated, then let him feed her. For a moment, as the warmth touched her lips, something broke in her face. Her eyes filled, but no tears came. She had none left to give. That was when she finally spoke her name. "Martha," she whispered. "Elijah," he said in return. The name hung between them, fragile as the thin smoke trailing up the chimney. By the end of the week, color crept faintly back into Martha's cheeks. She was still weak, still trembling, but no longer on death's edge. She tried to help around the cabin, folding his blankets, sweeping the floor with a branch broom, but her strength gave out too quickly. Elijah pretended not to notice. One evening, while he split wood just outside the door, he caught her watching him. She thought she was hidden behind the curtain of the small window, but he saw the flicker of her eyes, the way they tracked the swing of his axe. Not with fear, but with something nearer to wariness, a measuring look, as if weighing what kind of man he was. When he came back in, she had returned to her seat by the fire, shawl pulled tight, gaze fixed on the flames. He said nothing. He understood. It wasn't until the 10th day that she spoke of the winter. They sat together as the storm pressed against the cabin walls. Elijah smoked his pipe. Martha's hands were wrapped around a cup of broth. The firelight painted her face in flickers. "They stopped feeding me," she said suddenly, so quietly he almost missed it. Elijah stilled. "I was staying with kin," she went on, staring into the cup as though the broth might answer back. "After my husband passed, they said they'd keep me, but food grew thin and—" She trailed off, her lips tightening. "They decided I wasn't worth the share." Elijah felt a slow burn rise in his chest. He'd known hunger, and he'd known cruelty. But to combine the two, to let a woman starve while kin ate, that was worse than wolves. "They put me out," Martha whispered. "Said the snow could have me. I walked until I couldn't walk anymore." Her voice cracked. The golden cup trembled in her hands. Elijah reached forward, steadying it with his calloused palm. His thumb brushed hers only briefly, but the gesture was enough. Her eyes lifted, meeting his, and for the first time since he'd found her, she did not look away. "No one should be left to die in the snow," he said, low and firm. Her throat worked. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The days turned into weeks. Martha grew stronger, though she still tired quickly. Elijah trapped rabbits and brought in firewood. She tended the pot, mended what little clothing she had with his scraps of hide. Their silences grew companionable, no longer edged with mistrust. But Elijah noticed the way she startled at noises outside, how she flinched at the creak of the door in the wind. He knew the look. Fear baked so deep into the bones it lingered even when the danger was gone. One evening, as snow fell heavy and muffled the world, Elijah set another log on the fire. "You're safe here," he said, not turning to look at her. "Ain't no one crossing these drifts to find you." Her answer came after a long pause. "You don't know them." The weight in her tone stopped him cold. He looked at her then, really looked, at the set of her jaw, the shadows under her eyes. Whatever kin she had, they weren't done with her, not by a long shot. And in that moment, Elijah made a quiet vow. If those who starved her came searching, they would find not the frail woman they cast out, but a mountain man who had decided she was worth saving, and he wasn't about to let go. By late January, the snow lay in drifts taller than a man. The world outside Elijah's cabin was white silence, broken only by the groan of trees and the occasional cry of a hawk above the valley. Inside, the fire was a steady companion, filling the single room with warmth that both he and Martha clung to. She was stronger now. Her hands no longer shook when she lifted the ladle, and her cheeks, once hollow, had softened with the broth and the small meals Elijah hunted into being. But her eyes still carried winter in them. Elijah noticed it one evening as she mended the tear in his coat. She bent over the fabric, her fingers deft despite the scarring on her knuckles, but her gaze wasn't on the stitches. It was far away, fixed on something only she could see. "You've got a good hand with a needle," he said, partly to draw her back. Her lips curved faintly, the first shadow of a smile he'd seen on her. "I had to," she murmured. "Wasn't anyone else who would." She finished the stitch, tied it neatly, and laid the coat across his chair. Then she sat back, silent again. Elijah wanted to ask more, to pry the story from her, but he knew better. Wounds healed only when the flesh was ready. A week later, the thaw teased the valley. A brief rise in temperature sent water dripping from the roof and turned the snow heavy, though Elijah knew the deep cold would return before spring. Still, he took the chance to bring in more wood and check his traps. When he returned, arms laden with kindling, Martha was standing by the doorway. She wasn't bundled against the cold, but her posture was rigid, her eyes fixed on the ridge to the east. "What is it?" Elijah asked, setting down the wood. She startled, then shook her head quickly. "Nothing." But the tension in her shoulders told him otherwise. "Martha." His voice was gentle but firm. She hesitated. Then, with a breath that trembled, she said, "Sometimes I think I see them. Watching." Elijah felt his jaw tighten. "Them being?" Her eyes met his, raw with fear. "My kin, or what they called themselves." The word kin tasted bitter in her mouth. "They'd come all the way up here?" he asked. "They're cruel," she whispered, "and cruelty doesn't tire easy." Elijah didn't argue. He only nodded once. That night, when Martha slept, he set his rifle against the wall nearest the bed and sat up longer than usual, listening to the wind press against the cabin. Days passed without sign of anyone. Martha grew steadier on her feet, walking to the stream behind the cabin with Elijah, though he always kept close. She laughed once, a sudden, startled sound when her boot slipped on the ice and he caught her arm before she could fall. The laugh vanished as quickly as it came, but it lingered in Elijah's mind long after. That evening, as the fire crackled low, he found himself speaking aloud words he hadn't planned. "You ever think about spring?" She looked up from the shawl she was stitching. Spring. Snow melts, rivers rise, land wakes up again, easier living. He poked the log with the iron. Lot can be done in spring. Her gaze softened, but then her brow furrowed. "I don't know if spring holds anything for me." Elijah leaned back in his chair. "It does. You've just got to reach it." For the first time, she didn't argue. On the last night of January, a storm returned. Snow swept against the walls, rattling the shutters, howling down the chimney. Elijah set extra wood by the hearth and kept the flames high. Martha sat on the cot, staring at the fire. After a long silence, she said, "You should know what they did, before the snow." Elijah turned his head, listening. "They said I was a burden," she whispered, "that a mouth without a husband behind it is just a thief at the table. They locked the pantry, hid food where I couldn't reach. At first I thought it was punishment, something I could earn my way back from. But it wasn't. It was delight. They watched me grow weaker, and they laughed. Her voice cracked. She gripped the shawl until her knuckles whitened. They wanted to see how long I'd last. Elijah's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. His breath grew slow, controlled, though rage burned like a second fire inside him. He'd seen hunger in the mountains, seen men beg the land for roots and bark, but to starve someone for amusement was wickedness beyond reason. He moved closer, lowering himself to a stool beside her. "They won't touch you again," he said, each word liberate. Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I'm here," Elijah answered simply. For a long moment she stared at him, as if weighing the truth in his voice. Then, slowly, she leaned toward him, resting her forehead against his shoulder. She was trembling, but not with cold. Elijah let her stay. He didn't move, didn't speak, just kept the fire steady and let her know in silence that she wasn't alone anymore. The storm passed by dawn. The world outside was buried deeper, quiet as a grave, but inside the cabin a new thread had been spun. Fragile, yes, but strong enough to hold. Elijah fed the fire again, watching the sparks climb, and thought to himself, if spring came with danger, if kin came climbing through the snow with their cruel eyes and hungry hands, then so be it. They'd find a mountain man who'd already made his choice, and Martha, whether she knew it yet or not, was no longer theirs to starve. She was his to keep alive. By February, the snow hardened into a cruel crust, sharp enough to cut a boot if one misstepped. Elk tracks vanished from the valley, rabbits stayed hidden in burrows, and even the hawks circled thinner skies. Hunger pressed against the land like an iron hand. Inside Elijah's cabin, though, the fire still burned. He had stretched their stores with care, dried venison, flour ground from autumn's harvest, and the rabbits caught in his traps. Martha ate small but steady, and her cheeks no longer carried the hollow sharpness of starvation. She was still too thin, but there was a pulse of life in her now, something steady and stubborn. On one quiet morning, as the frost clung to the window panes, she asked him, "Why do you live out here, Elijah? Alone, I mean." He glanced up from the snares he was mending. Questions from her were rare. "Easier to breathe," he said simply. "World down in the, towns. Too many voices, too much taking and not enough giving. Up here it's just me and the mountain, the way I like it." Her brow furrowed. "Doesn't it get lonely?" He looked at her then, really. Looked. The way her fingers curled around the shawl she'd been sewing, the way her eyes flickered between him and the fire. "Not anymore," he said. The words hung between them, soft and steady, like the crackle of the hearth. The quiet didn't last. It was near dusk when Elijah first noticed the sign. He'd been splitting wood behind the cabin when his axe caught on the grain and his gaze lifted toward the tree line. There, half buried in the snow, was a set of tracks. Fresh ones. Boots, not animal. He followed them with his eyes, tracing the line until they disappeared into the shadows of the ridge. Elijah's hand tightened on the axe. When he stepped back inside, Martha was stirring the pot, her face flushed from the heat of the fire. She glanced up, immediately catching the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" she asked, her voice careful. "Tracks," he said. "Men." Her hand froze on the ladle. The color drained from her cheeks. "They've come." Elijah didn't ask how she knew. He could see it in her eyes, that old fear, sharp as the winter wind. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low but steady. "If they show their faces, I'll deal with it. You don't open the door unless it's me. Understand?" She nodded, but her breath shook. That night, Elijah kept the rifle beside his chair. Sleep came only in fragments. Every creak of the wood, every sigh of the wind sounded like a footstep outside. 2 days passed with no sign of them, but the tracks haunted the snow. Martha grew restless, pacing the cabin in silence, her eyes darting to the shutter whenever the wind shifted. On the 3rd day, the knock came. A heavy, deliberate thud against the door. Martha froze where she stood, her face pale. Elijah motioned her back with a firm hand, then rose slowly, rifle in his grip. "Who's there?" His voice cut through the stillness. A laugh answered him. Rough, familiar. Liar only to Martha. She flinched as if struck. "Elijah," the voice drawled through the wood. "We ain't here for trouble. Just came looking for what belongs to us. You've got her in there, don't you?" Elijah's jaw clenched. Martha's whisper carried across the room. "Don't open it, please." He didn't. Instead, he spoke through the door, his tone hard as stone. "She doesn't belong to you." Silence stretched. Then the laugh came again, colder this time. "Everything in that family belongs where it's told. Don't matter if she's half dead or not. She's ours." The door rattled under a fist. Martha covered her mouth to stifle a sob. Elijah lifted the rifle, barrel aimed at the wood. His voice dropped to a growl. "Step off my porch, now." Another long silence. Then boots crunching on snow, fading back toward the trees. But Elijah knew it wasn't over. Men like that didn't walk away. Not for long. The cabin felt smaller after that, walls pressing in. Martha stayed close to the fire, her shawl clutched around her shoulders, her body taut as a bowstring. Elijah worked with quiet efficiency, checking his traps, reinforcing the shutters, stacking the woodpile higher. "They'll come back," she said one night, her voice hoarse. "Yes," he admitted. Her eyes searched his. "You can't fight them all." "I don't have to fight them all," Elijah said. "I just have to fight enough to make them think twice." For a long time she stared at him. Then she whispered, "Why? Why do this for me?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He watched the fire, the way the flames leaned and curled around the wood. Finally, he said, "Because you deserve to live, and I won't see another winter claim what wickedness already tried to take." Tears welled in her eyes, though she turned her face away so he wouldn't see. But Elijah saw, and it steeled him all the more. The next dawn broke brittle and clay. Air. Elijah stepped outside, scanning the ridge. No movement, but the snow told the truth. Fresh prints circling the cabin, closer this time. He knew what it meant. They were waiting, watching, like wolves testing the edge of the herd. When he returned inside, Martha's gaze met his. She didn't need words to know. He set the rifle against the wall, fed another log into the fire, and spoke softly. "Stay near the hearth today. If anything happens, you run to the back and keep low." Her hand trembled as it touched his sleeve. "And you?" Elijah looked at her, steady as the mountain itself. "I'll be right here." Outside, the snow glared white beneath the sun. Somewhere in the trees, boots shifted, breaths smoked the air, and cruel eyes fixed on the cabin. But inside, the fire still burned, and Elijah had already decided. If they wanted to starve her, take her, break her again, they'd have to go through him. And he was not a man who yielded easy. The morning came so quiet it felt staged. No wind, no birds, no sound of branches creaking. Elijah knew that kind of silence. It was the hush before a storm, not of weather, but of men. He rose before dawn, slipping his coat over broad shoulders and checking the rifle. Martha stirred from her cot, her hair loose, eyes heavy with sleep, but she saw the look on his face and sat upright at once. "They're here," she whispered. "Not yet," Elijah said. His voice was steady, though the set of his jaw told her he was bracing himself. "But they will be, before the sun sets." Martha's hands clutched the quilt around her shoulders. "Elijah, if they mean to take me, they won't." The finality in his tone silenced her, but fear still burned in her gaze, fear so deep it looked older than she was. By midday, the first shadow moved among the pines. Elijah caught it as he split wood, the axe halting mid-swing. A figure, then another, the glint of metal in the weak light. He counted 3 at first, then 4. By the time the 5th appeared, his pulse was a slow, even drumbeat in his ears. They weren't rushing, they were circling, air herding him like wolves. Elijah set the axe down and lifted the rifle. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching on the snow. "Morning, gentlemen," he called, his voice carrying low and even across the frozen yard. The men emerged from the trees, spreading into a line. Their coats were ragged, beards frosted, eyes cold and hollow with the cruelty of hunger and spite. One of them, tall, scar-faced, stepped forward. "Don't reckon this is your concern, mountain man. We came for what's ours." The rifle never wavered. Elijah's finger rested easy on the trigger, though his shoulders were loose, unshaken. "She's not yours," he said flatly. A laugh, sharp and mean, broke across the line of men. "She was raised in our house, fed by our hand. When food ran short, she owed it back. That's how it works." Behind Elijah, the cabin door creaked. Martha's voice, strained but fierce, carried through the wood. "I don't owe you anything." The scarred man's lip curled. "There she is. Always thought she had too much fire in her belly. Maybe we should beat it out, like before." Elijah's rifle lifted higher, the barrel aimed square at the man's chest. "Try." The standoff thickened like the cold air. Snowflakes drifted slow from the grey sky, settling on rifle barrels, on coats stiff with frost. The man spat into the snow. "You won't last against us. 1 gun, 1 man. We'll drag her out, and when we do, we'll make sure you regret ever stepping in." Elijah's eyes narrowed, his voice calm as still water. 1 man is all it takes, if he's the right one. The first move came sudden. A shot cracked from the line, the bullet hissing past Elijah's head, shattering bark off the post. Martha screamed from inside. Elijah fired back. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, and one of the men dropped into the snow with a grunt, clutching his side. Chaos erupted. 2 men rushed from the flank, boots pounding over the crusted snow. Elijah swung the rifle like a staff, striking one across the jaw, the crack of bone sharp in the air. The other lunged, blade flashing, but Elijah drove. A boot into his chest, sending him sprawling into the drift. A shot tore through Elijah's coat, grazing his arm. He gritted his teeth, spun, and fired again. Another man crumpled, blood spreading across white snow. But they were many, and he was one. The scarred leader advanced through the smoke of gunpowder, teeth bared in a wolf's grin. He carried no rifle now, only a long hunting knife, its edge black with old rust. "You should have stayed in your mountains, old man." Elijah chambered his last round, the click loud in the still air. "And you should have stayed hungry." He fired. The shot struck the leader's shoulder, spinning him, but the man didn't fall. He kept coming, rage carrying him forward. Elijah swung the rifle as a club, striking him across the head. The leader staggered, but slashed out with the knife, the blade tearing into Elijah's side. A roar ripped from Elijah's chest, part pain, part fury. He caught the man's wrist, twisted hard, and drove his knee into his gut. The knife clattered to the ground. Snow churned under them as they grappled, boots slipping, breath steaming in the frigid air. The others had fallen back, watching, waiting to see who would break. It was Martha's voice that cut through the storm. "Elijah!" He glanced back, just a flicker, but enough. The leader slammed his fist into Elijah's jaw, driving him to his knees. The knife was back in his grip, raised high. "Say goodbye," the man sneered. But Elijah's hand found the axe buried in the chopping block. In one motion, he swung upward, burying the blade into the man's chest. The leader's eyes went wide. A choking gasp left his throat. Then he crumpled, knife falling uselessly into the snow. For a long moment, nothing moved. Only the wind returned, carrying the faint crackle of the fire inside the cabin. Elijah staggered to his feet, blood seeping through his shirt, breath rags. His rifle hung limp at his side, the axe still gripped tight. He looked at the men still standing. "You want her," he rasped. "You'll have to join him in the dirt." They faltered. One by one, their resolve broke. Without their leader, without their strength, they turned, retreating into the trees, their boots vanishing into the drifts. Elijah watched until the last shadow disappeared. Then, and only then, did he lower the axe. Martha burst from the cabin, skirts flying, her face pale with terror. She reached him just as his knees buckled, catching his weight against her smaller frame. "Elijah, no, no!" "It's not deep," he gasped, though the blood soaking his coat said otherwise. "Just a cut. I've had worse." Her hands shook as she pressed cloth to his side, tears slipping down her face. "You could have died. You nearly—" He caught her wrist, his grip still firm despite the weakness in his body. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. "I told you. They won't take you." And then his strength gave out, and he sagged against her, half-conscious. Martha held him, her body trembling, her breath ragged. Around them the snow was torn and red, the mountain silent once more. But the fire inside the cabin still burned, waiting, and so did Martha. She wasn't going to let the mountain man fall, not after what he'd done, not after he'd proved to her that her life, her survival, was worth fighting for.